Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really powerful blueprint for self-mastery. But look, this isn't your average run-of-the-mill self-help stuff. We're actually synthesizing wisdom that spans from ancient Stoic philosophers all the way to modern-day championship coaches. We're going to explore how building yourself up is literally the absolute prerequisite to serving others. I'm incredibly excited to share this with you because this structure, it has the power to completely change how you operate on a team, in your family, and just in your life overall. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this with a legendary thought from college football coach Bear Bryant. He said, in order to have a winner, the team must have a feeling of unity. Every player must put the team first ahead of personal glory. Now, this is our foundational starting point. We all love the idea of unity, right? We all want to be the kind of person who puts the team first. But, reading a quote and nodding along, well, that's the easy part. The actual real work is figuring out what happens next. Which leads us to the big, absolutely crucial question. How do we actually put the group first? Like, how do we move from a nice, inspiring quote to actual daily execution? The answer isn't just one single idea or a random burst of motivation. It's this concept of progressive revelation that we call the chain. It's essentially a sequence of deliberate actions and mindsets that just build right on top of each other. So our explainer today breaks this chain down into 4 distinct links. First, strategy before motion. Then, guarding mind and body. Third, the test of adversity. And finally, what remains is people. I promise you, these 4 threads are going to weave into one completely unified, actionable framework by the very end of our time together. All right, let's start with link number 1, strategy before motion. So when we're starting out, we have to look at why mere optimism simply isn't enough to build true team unity or personal success. According to author Seth Godin, when we set out to do something, we often fall into one of 2 incredibly costly traps. The first trap is overcomplicating the blueprint. This happens when you use strategic conversations not to actually sharpen a plan, but basically to talk yourself out of acting at all. You convince yourself the odds are too long or the plan is way too complex, so it's just easier to stay home. But on the flip side, the opposite failure is just as dangerous: optimism without strategy. This is when you just jump in headfirst with blind enthusiasm. Sure, you increase the odds of starting, but you also drastically increase the odds of failing expensively. Beginning with zero strategy leaves you completely vulnerable to hidden systems, community expectations, and competing incentives that are going to quietly work against you. So the absolute crucial point here is that a blueprint, verbally tested in advance, is exactly what holds a person steady when that very first obstacle appears or when tempting alternatives try to pull you off course. If we connect Godin's idea back to Bear Bryant's concept of unity, well, it makes perfect sense. A team that has actually talked through its blueprint together can absolutely put personal glory aside in the heat of the moment. Why? Because everyone already knows the plan. They know exactly what they agreed to do, and they know why they're doing it. Moving right along to link number 2, guarding mind and body. Look, a great strategy on paper really means nothing if you lack the actual capacity to execute it. And this brilliantly illustrates the reality of physical and mental training, drawing on some great insights from strength coach Dan John and the ancient philosopher Socrates. Socrates famously said that no one has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. Dan John gives this a really practical mechanism. Basically, everything works for about 6 weeks. In week 1, your early effort and enthusiasm kind of paper over the gaps. But beyond week 6, sustained time and pressure act like a massive magnifying glass. Time will always expose a habit half-formed, a strategy half-tested, or a discipline practiced without your full attention. Whatever a team or an individual is not deliberately training will eventually surface as a glaring deficiency when the pressure is on. And this training isn't just about lifting weights, it's totally about your attention. Author Ryan Holiday introduces this concept called screen sickness. It's basically the modern version of an untrained deficiency. It's that grouchy, distracted, utterly disconnected state you get from staring at a device for way too long. I mean, we have all been there after a 45-minute doom scrolling session, right? The cure is incredibly simple: a phone-free stretch of time, a walk outside. But the people who build these devices have literally spent billions making that cure hard to reach for. You really have to ask yourself, are you the one using the technology, or are you the one being used by it? For a team relying on a calm body and a quiet mind, guarding your attention is an absolutely vital, daily practiced skill. Which brings us to a super fascinating paradox about rest.
If we combine Holiday's thoughts with a parable from Anthony de Mello, we see that passive stillness, like staring blankly at a screen, is not true rest. De Mello notes that a disciple once complained he never experienced silence, and his master replied that silence only comes to active people. Think about that for a second. Earned stillness is the quiet that becomes available only to someone who has already put in the hard work. Quiet is not the reward of doing nothing. It's actually the product of deep, active engagement.
Now for link number 3, the test of adversity. So once you have a strategy and you've trained your mind and body to actually execute it, you are ready for the crucible. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "The more precarious his situation, the more firmly he should be resolved to stand and fight." This just sets the stage so beautifully. We often hear that adversity creates character, right? But the sources we're analyzing today argue something slightly different. Adversity doesn't necessarily create character out of thin air. It actually tests and reveals whatever was already forming beneath the surface. It shows you the true reality of your training. Let's look at 3 pretty powerful examples of this in action. First up, the CEO of Charles Schwab famously tests job candidates by purposefully having their breakfast order messed up. It's not just to be mean. It's because how someone handles a small, unearned inconvenience reveals way more about their character than any polished interview answer ever could. Second, there's Zeno, the actual founder of Stoicism. The guy lost his entire fortune in a shipwreck, but instead of despairing, he found philosophy in the wreckage, famously saying he made a great fortune when he suffered that shipwreck. And third, in modern sports, coach Sean Payton inherited a losing Denver Broncos team. Instead of tearing the whole shebang down in despair, he looked for what was already working and built up from there. True leaders channel the philosopher Epictetus. When things go wrong, they simply persist and resist. Now, if you're sitting there feeling a bit overwhelmed by these monumental examples of resilience, don't worry. Marcus Aurelius offers some incredible relief here. He advises that perfect, permanent composure is not the standard. You don't have to be perfectly stoic forever. Managing your composure for just a single afternoon, or surviving one really hard conversation, or just getting through one tough practice, that is completely enough to build on. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast in how we view our timeline to make these changes. On one side, we have a 16th century poet named Robert Southwell. He practiced a really passive memento mori, meaning he stared at reminders of his own death every single day, like literally hanging a hearse image over his bed. But he admitted he never actually changed his life, because knowing you'll die doesn't matter if it doesn't actually change you. Marcus Aurelius, however, demands active amendment. He says, you could leave life right now, let that determine what you do and say and think today. It's this urgent, powerful demand to change your behavior immediately while there's still time on the clock. And that brings us to our 4th and final link. What remains is people. This really brings us to the narrative climax of the whole explainer. What is all this strategy, all this physical and mental discipline, all this endurance actually for? Well, we can strip away all the complex philosophy with a single core truth, synthesized from writers Matthew Lucado and Esmeralda Santiago. They point out that strategy, discipline, stillness, and resilience, they're actually not the point of a life, or even the point of a season. They are simply the tools that make a person capable of showing up well for the people who are actually around them. As Santiago notes, you can't change society, only yourself, one individual at a time. It always, absolutely always, comes down to how you treat individuals, avoiding gossip, speaking well of others, and just serving your neighbor. Which loops us right back around to where we started with Bear Bryant's concept of team unity and leaving that personal glory behind. Because everything you build inside yourself is ultimately a gift to the people around you. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to take with you. If you could leave life right now, how would it change the way you treat the people around you today? Really think about that blueprint. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.